Hello, Change People, the Change Programme I should say. Community for Health, Activity, Nutrition, Great Epigenealogy. Session 2, looking at my second nutritional plan, which is the Metabolic Reset, which, again, this is about making things simple and easy to follow. So I'm going to keep this punchy to the point, but I just want to put across the benefits of what this nutritional plan is based around. And in essence, it's a fasting protocol. Now, don't panic. People hear the term fasting. There is it's not an easy way of doing it, but there is a sense to it, and it's a very accessible thing that just general people can do. It's not anything for extreme athletes or people that go off in hills and act as monks for days. But first question, why fasting? So I touched on this last time, but one of the things I like to look at is why we've survived in the form that we are in now. I mentioned this about the paleo movement, that's a bit of an influence. And we do have to think about sort of the survival of the fittest, the evolution of biology, why we survived in this form now, why did this form of us stay? And there's no getting around it. One of something that's an integral part of our history, a big and a long part of our history, is fasting. And like I said, I'm not a sadist. I'm not talking about going a week without food or anything like that. But we do have to acknowledge that fasting's a big part of why we've come to where we are. And something, there's lots of controversy in the world of nutrition, but something that's pretty incontroversial is the idea that fasting equates to longevity, living longer. And if you look at sort of population studies and demographic studies, and fasting does equate to living longer. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about in terms of the way I approach it, because it's about accessibility to the normal people, I don't want to get into the idea of huge calorie restriction approaches. All cards on the table. There is some link, there's a link between big calorie restriction and longevity. However, away from that, fasting does have just lots of benefits. I'm going to touch on what they are. There's three main areas. There's changes to the body, change to the mind, which are linked together, and there is health benefits. But yeah, as I mentioned, this for me is not about huge caloric restriction. In fact, there's a lot of people I train who want to grow muscle, and you can actually really only grow and bodybuild and make muscle bigger in a calorie surplus. But I'd still encourage those people to do intermittent fasting for various reasons, which I will touch on. But yes, it's just the idea of what it basically is about. It's about normalizing our relationship to food, our appetite, getting away from lots of the signaling, because we've got this just incredible access to lots of food, and also a lot of the signals that we get from just the outside world in general, sort of normalizes eating all the time regularly. But what this metabolic reset does, it resets things like our hormone, appetite hormone, ghrelin, and our leptin level. So in a sense, it gives us just a healthy relationship with food. So we eat when we're naturally hungry. You'll find that if you intermittent fast quite regularly, your appetite normalizes. So I've mentioned it's hitting three key areas. So we've got the body, how it changes the body, because it definitely does. I'll just touch on the mind and health, and I'll begin with health. Now, there's lots of studies around things like inflammation, sort of its impact on free radicals, which are these rebellious cells that's kind of linked to cancers, oxidative stress. They are, in all honesty, those kind of evidence and studies are based on animals. So I'm not going to stress those, but I do think it's fair to say that indications just give us lots of good nudges that these are helpful in those areas. One of the things it's definitely helpful for is about how it manipulates our gene expression in terms of like longevity and protection against disease. those things I think are pretty definitive. So it does, and this touches on the last video I mentioned, things like our insulin levels, so which is something of a chronic issue in the Western world. We are overly using the insulin hormone, and that's why we've got a lot of the diabetic type 2 and pre-diabetic crises and obesity crises. So, and that kind of links into the change I mentioned about body change, because the drop in insulin is good for circulatory health, but it's also obviously good for those illnesses I mentioned, and truthfully it's very good for weight loss. And the last one I'll touch on around health is the cellular regenerative positive influence that fasting does. And just to underline the credibility of fasting, the 2016 Nobel Prize for Medicine was awarded to Dr. Ashumi around this, an area you might have heard of called autophagy. And what that basically is, it talks about how we regenerate ourselves. We are constantly regenerating all the cells in our body, systems, organs, everything is constantly being regenerated. So what that gives us is young, growing, maturing cells versus ones that have done their job, older, dying, decaying cells. And those latter ones, what they can do is kind of get in the way, make us inefficient, clog up the system. And what autophagy encourages is the fasting, what encourages the younger, growing, maturing cells, encourages them to start to consume or redirect those older, decaying ones in a more positive way. So it just basically makes a new self, when we're regenerating, stronger, healthier, more robust, youthful, and that sort of gives us a little hint into why it's linked so much to longevity and anti-aging and healthfulness. So going into the body though, this is probably a big factor why people choose to fast, because it does have big body composition impact, which because what it does is basically it makes the body look for other energy sources within the body, because we're not consuming food. We don't have its usual energy source, which is sugar. And I mentioned in my last video, we've got two energy sources, sugar and fats. So what we call sugar, the technical term glucose in the body, doesn't have any, so it has to loot the body for other sources, which is our body fat. And it does that in conjunction, or uses, again, a technical term, the catecholamine hormones, which are the hormones like adrenaline and its relatives, which set the environment for us to oxidate lipolysis, burn fat, so get fat as an energy source. So that's obviously a huge benefit for people if you want to lose weight, not just lose weight but lose fat. Yes, so you got lipolysis, you've got and the energy source it doesn't use, which it could do, which is our own body tissue, our body muscle. And the reason it doesn't is because the other thing that fasting does, it has a massive increase in our human growth hormone secretion. And human growth hormone, at the very least, you can say it's muscle sparing, and it's, in the right circumstances, it's about growing muscle. And there's various studies showing various differences, but ultimately a huge increase in human growth hormone occurs when we're fasted for a prolonged period of time. Little touch on things around the mind, because it's a lot to do with BDNF, so brain-derived neurotrophic factors, which are basically the fertilization environment for new nerve cells and in the brain, and the protection of the brain nerve cells. And there's other evidences that show it's good for cognition, it's good for the mind. Maybe some also more spiritual aspects to that. But in general, it's one of the things that you can fairly, in a fairly relaxed fashion. I'm no doctor, and it's not perhaps ideal for everybody. There's certain perhaps demographics that you know, you might be hesitant at, but in general, throwing some strategic intermittent fasts, you can look at different things. A lot of people, we might start on a 16 fasting window with an 8-hour eating window, including your night sleep. then you probably want to push that a little bit. You might want to do it a couple of times a week. You might get to a stage where you're doing it maybe every other day. And as I mentioned, it's not about really that will take care of some calorie deficit just naturally, but it's about normalizing our appetite. So having a good wholesome eating day, eating the right things, eating healthy and clean things. But when we're eating well, and we just add in some, and it's good for the digestive system, gives the gut a break, allows us to get some collagen into the gut lining. So there's loads of, and that's about how you break the fast and what you should do when you open it. But ultimately, my nudge is to throw in some intermittent fasting into your life, and yeah, you will see the benefits. So I'm going to continue this theme tomorrow. We're going to look at metabolic enhancement. But thanks for listening. Change Program Nutritional Plan 2 out. Thank you.